So tonight, let's talk about machine-made matzah versus Shmurah matzah. And tonight, let's dedicate the learning for a speedy recovery for all those suffering from the coronavirus. Unfortunately, I know many friends who need a refuah shlema, who need a speedy recovery. In addition, there are many people worldwide suffering from this. Unfortunately, there have been already some tragic deaths concerning the coronavirus. So let's dedicate tonight's learning for the recovery and for the ending of all sickness and suffering, specifically the coronavirus. So we Jews argue about everything, and one of the greatest arguments that has existed throughout the ages is what kind of matzah will you be eating at the Seder? Will you have the round, hand-baked Shmurah matzah, or will you have the machine-baked square matzah, which is the Manischewitz? Tonight I want to point out where this came from and why. Why do we Jews argue about this? So for the last roughly 3,300 years, we Jews have been eating matzah at the Seder. It started with the matzah which the Jews baked when they left Egypt. And there's many laws associated with the matzah, including the ingredients. Where do they come from? How do they come? For example, the water. The water has to be wool. That's great. Round all the way. Fantastic. Shmurah matzah, you on that side. So round or hand or square. So the water, for example, has to be maim shelanu, water which has, without getting into all the details now, maim shelanu, a specific water which has, been overnight. And then the wheat and the flour the wheat has to be guarded. When does it have to be guarded from? There's a lot of laws associated with this. But in the olden days, so for centuries, Jews, every single Jew, used to bake the matzah in his or her house. The woman used to bake it, in the kitchens, in their own places. They used to get the ingredients. Hi, Rob, nice to see you. So the woman used to get it from and bake it. Every home used to bake their own matzah, and this was how it was for literally centuries. And there's laws also, the 18 minutes, obviously. And then what happened is, in 1838, this was around the time of the Industrial Revolution. Rakusen's matzah from Leeds, England. Yes, excellent matzah. So in 1838, around the time of the Industrial Revolution, this triggered one of the greatest debates in history. So in 1838, there was a man by the name of Isaac Singer. He was living in France, and he invented the first machine for baking matzah. An unknown Jew by the name of Isaac Singer. And because he was living in France, and most Jews at the time were living in Eastern Europe, that was a gigantic center of Jewish life, so it never received much of, it didn't get to the big center of Judaism yet. Daniel, your grandfather, a professional matzah maker in Hungary. Nice. Good. So he got a heter from the rabbis in Germany, and he did it probably for a couple of years. He baked a machine-made matzah. But then 18 years later, in 1856, there was a Jewish baker in Vienna, and he created a much more efficient machine for matzah production. And this machine, because he was living in Vienna, it triggered the communities in Poland and Galicia where the centers, the bastion of Jews were. So this triggered now one of the greatest debates to take place. So in 1859, the question was asked of the famous Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, one of the greatest Torah giants of his generation. They asked him whether matzah made by a machine was acceptable or not. And Rabbi Kluger declared that this was absolutely forbidden. There's no way you could use a machine-made matzah. You have to use hand-baked matzah the way Jews were doing it for centuries. And in a letter, he explained why, which I'm going to explain in a moment. But he was joined by many, many of the greatest rabbis, for example, the Chidushei Arim, for example, the Divrei Chaim, the Avnei Nezer, the fourth and fifth Lubavitcher Rebbes as well. They all declared their absolute opposing view to machine-made matzah. But on the other side, you had great Torah giants like Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson, You had the Ksav Sofer, who was the son of the Chasam Sofer, one of the greatest Torah giants. You had the author of the Tiferes Yisrael and the Mishnah, and these were great rabbis who absolutely said that you are allowed to use machine-made matzah. So the debate became heated. It was like civil war. It was a war of whether to permit machine-made matzah or hand-baked matzah, like it always was. Rabbi Kluger published no less than 10 letters defending his decision, calling it a declaration to the house of Israel. On the other hand, Rabbi Natanson published 20 letters defending his. Every major rabbi in Europe took sides on this dispute. This was like major news, and Judaism was divided. Some people allowed machine-made matzah, and some people insisted it had to be, like it always was, hand-baked matzah. So, what are the reasons? Why were the rabbis so vehemently opposed to machine-made matzah? What's wrong with it? So there's a couple of objections, and I'll get to the main one in a minute. One of the objections was, you see, the intricacy of machinery makes it extremely difficult to ensure that no dough remains in the machine, and I'll explain. There are certain things. For example, let's take treifa meat, non-kosher meat. If non-kosher meat by mistake gets mixed into kosher meat, so we have the law of batel b'shishim. It's nullified in 60. If you have 60 times the amount of kosher, the amount of kosher, 60 times the amount of the treif, then by default this thing now is kosher. So if you have liquid, which is non-kosher, mixed in your soup, as long as the soup has 60 times the amount of the non-kosher, you are allowed to drink that soup, no problems whatsoever. Obviously, if a non-kosher piece of meat gets mixed into your meat, you just pick up that non-kosher meat and take it away. Same thing is, for example, meat and milk. If you have a little bit of meat which mixes into milk, if you have 60 times the milk than the meat, then there's no problem. Chametz, on the other hand, chametz, which is the unleavened bread, which is the bread, chametz is afilu be'elef lo batel. Even in 1,000, it's never ever bottled, never nullified. You cannot nullify it. Unlike other forbidden substances, chametz can never be nullified. Even 1 in 1,000 can never be nullified. So if you have the minutest amount of chametz, the tiniest amount of chametz, you cannot use the entire substance, and it's all gone. By the way, the Arizal writes, Kol hanizar b'mashu chometz, muftach lo shelo yechta kol hashana. Somebody who is careful with a little bit, a minute amount of chometz, it's promised to him that he won't sin a whole year. Just the Kabbalah explains, Chassidus explains, that the difference between chometz and matzah, chometz is bread which has risen, matzah is bread which is flat. So on a symbolic level, chametz represents the ego, and matzah represents humility. Chametz and matzah have the same letters. They both have a mem. They both have a tzaddik. The difference is the chet in chametz versus the hey in matzah. Chametz, when you are a person who's full of ego, the chametz, the chet, has a wall above and 2 walls like this. So the only way you can go is below, is down. But on the other hand, the hay has an opening on the side, so if you are a person who's humble, you have an opening on the side to escape to. So chametz and matzah, when you're cleaning up for chametz, really and truly what you also should be doing is cleaning up your character traits, making sure you have no trace of ego inside of you. When you're spending time doing bdikat chametz, checking for chametz, you also should be checking the chametz inside of you to make sure you don't have the minutest amount of chametz inside of you. So one reason why there were rabbis which were adamantly opposed to the machine made matzah is because you're dealing with a machine, it's very, very difficult to make sure that there's no remnants of the dough in the machine. And remember, you only have 18 minutes with which to bake the matzah. So if something is left over after 18 minutes, all subsequent batches of matzah will all be chametz, because remember the rule, chametz even 1 in 1,000 is never ever nullified, never. So all the subsequent batches would all be invalidated, they will all be chametz. The defending rabbis, by the way, they said this is the reason why matzah, machine-made matzah, is square, to ensure that there's no remnant of dough left over. The square goes straight inside the machine, comes out exactly the way it is, so there's nothing else, there's no dough, no remnants, no nothing. Were the machine-made matzah to be round, you would have a problem. They agree with that. So that's one issue, one concern. Another concern is that because you're dealing with a machine which is excessively hot, it would heat up the dough to the point of concern that the dough would ferment prematurely. It would become chametz earlier on because you're dealing with an intense amount of heat. On the other hand, when you're dealing with something which is hand-baked, you have more control over it, and therefore won't become chametz. A third concern was just purely social. Many poor families depended on working in the matzah bakeries for their livelihood. So the rabbis felt if the machines replaced the handmade matzah bakeries, these people would lose their jobs. And a fourth concern had to do with the times. We were talking about the Enlightened movement, the Haskalah. So the rabbis felt if you change the way it was done for so many years, you would be giving into the Haskalah movement. But here is the main issue, which I'm about to mention right now. The main debate. The main reason there was a problem between the rabbis who opposed the machine-made matzah was the following. The law states as follows. In the Chumash, in the Bible, it says like this. In the halachot, where it discusses the matzah and the creation of the matzah, it says the words ushmartem et hamatzot. Ushmartem et hamatzot means you should guard the matzah. And it continues, כי בעצם היום הזה הוצאתי את צבאותיכם מארץ מצרים ושמרתם את היום הזה לדורותיכם לחוקת עולם. But the word ושמרתם את המצות, what does this mean? You should guard the matzah. Guard it from what? You should guard the matzah from thieves? How about guarding your tefillin from thieves? How about guarding your mezuzah? How about guarding any other mitzvah? Why does the Torah say specifically by matzah you should guard the matzah? What's special about matzah that requires guarding? And if we're talking about guarding it from becoming chametz, that's pretty obvious. So here's the law with chametz. The law is that matzah, when it's baked, it requires intent. Meaning, if you open a matzah bakery and you bake the matzah for the bar mitzvah of your child, and you have extra matzah left over, you cannot use this matzah for Pesach. Because it has to be baked with a specific intention for using it for Pesach. That's what it means. Ushmartem et hamatzot. You should make the matzot. You should guard the matzah and make it lishma, for intent, for intention. L'shem matzot mitzvah. In fact, when you go to a bakery, any bakery you would go to, you'd walk into, whenever they bake the matzah, they say the statement, L'shem matzahs mitzvah. We are doing this now for the mitzvah of matzah. We are doing this for the mitzvah of matzah. They constantly saying it all the time. So the rabbis who were opposed to the machine-made matzah, they said that a machine has no intention. How could a machine have intention that this machine is now making the matzah for the mitzvah? Machine doesn't have intention. When a human being is doing it, I understand, the human being has intention. But a machine has no intention, and thus they disqualified the machine-made matzah. This was their argument. A machine has no consciousness, no intent to knead the dough for the sake of the mitzvah. What would the other side say? Remember, we're talking about leading rabbis. And this debate rages till today, in 2020. Leading rabbis who say that no, machine-made matzah is fine. What do they say? Don't you need intent? So they would argue the following. They say that since a human being is turning the switch on or off, And when the human being does it, he has intention, he has in mind. For the mitzvah of matzah, it's considered as if the person has done it himself. This is the argument. So the ones who said it's forbidden said, when you're actually baking the matzah, you need to have intention, you need to have in mind. And the rabbis defending it say no, not so simple. When you turn the switch on or off, you having in mind the mitzvah of matzah, and therefore it's fine. So then you have a debate whether the electricity is enabled through manpower, it just by the first moment of activity, is that considered the intention or non-intention? That's where you had the mitzvah. So this is where it comes from, guarding the matzah. What does it mean to guard the matzah from chametz? But this was all, remember this was in the late 1800s. But then something happened which changed the whole history of this entire thing. In 1886, there was a man by the name of Rabbi Abramson. He was from a small Lithuanian town, and he purchased a passport of a dead person in order to escape Europe. There was somebody who died. That somebody who died, his name was Dovber Manischewitz. So Rabbi Abramson purchased the passport of Dovber Manischewitz in order to escape Europe, and he came together with his wife Nesha to a little town called Cincinnati. And in Cincinnati, this Rabbi Abramson, who's now named Rabbi Manischewitz, he began his career in America in Cincinnati as a shoichet, as a slaughterer, and a little part-time peddler. So his first Pesach in America, he couldn't get matzah from his old town in Europe. So Rabbi Dovber Manischewitz, whose real name was Rabbi Abramson, he made his own matzah. And then, 2 years later, he started a small matzah bakery in his basement for his family and friends. And then what happened was demand grew for matzah from an unexpected market. At that time, Cincinnati was a prominent starting point for pioneers heading west. And they needed, without fridges, without anything, they needed in items that they can carry across the whole trip. Non-perishable items. What is a better non-perishable item for these people who were leaving Cincinnati and heading west? What's better than matzah? So, our dear Rabbi Manischewitz, whose real name was Rabbi Abramson, he managed for the first time in history to turn matzah into a successful industry. And he was selling matzah to Gentiles, to non-Jewish people who needed the matzah because they were going west all the way from Cincinnati. So by 1900, Rabbi Manischewitz, whose real name was Rabbi Abramson, he opened a massive matzah factory. Within a very, very short period, the factory was producing 75,000 pounds of matzah every single day. Most of it was being purchased by non-Jews who were heading from Cincinnati. They were heading west, and this was their best non-perishable item. So at first, Manishevitz's new factory produced no matzah for Pesach, but then as the need grew and the company grew, by 1920, he was producing 1.25 million matzahs every single day. So the rabbis started looking at the Manischewitz, and they gave him a heter, and they gave him the ability to produce matzah also for Passover. Today, the most critical way the machine-made matzah changed the matzah business is if you want to buy a pound of Shmurah matzah, hand-baked matzah, it's about $20 a pound. On the other hand, if you buy Manischewitz matzah, it's about $3 a pound. So that's why a lot of people buy the machine-made matzah. It's simply much cheaper. By 1990, by the way, the Manischewitz company sold out, forget the name of the company they sold it to, but they sold it for about $40 million, and it sold more times in 1998, and in 2007, it sold for over $100 million. And this is all from Manischewitz. So here you have the history of where hand-baked matzah and Shmurah matzah started. The main debate which rages till today is about the intent. Do you need intent when you bake the matzah or not? This actually is what makes Jews so special and unique. We argue about everything, but it's an argument for the sake of heaven. It's an argument l'shem shamayim. It's an argument because we want to know, what does the Torah mean? What does God mean when He said, "Ushmartem et hamatzot," you should guard the matzah? This is what's made our nation so beautiful, so intellectually amazing, so sharp and so analytical. It's one of the greatest things which is about our Torah and about our Judaism, that we could argue and respect each other's opinion. My personal opinion is we are adamant that we use the Shmurah matzah, the round matzah. This is the matzah we give out to all our communities and to everybody. We specifically give out the hand-baked matzah, and therefore I encourage you to use the Shmurah matzah, the hand-baked matzah, because we are specifically intentional about the Ushmartem et hamatzot. You should guard it for all the reasons I specified above. Hope you have a wonderful, kosher and freilichen Pesach.